So now we'll quickly move on to the panel discussion. We have a very interesting panel which is going to be chaired by Anurag Batra. In fact, Anurag is a very close friend. We have known each other for about 22 years. In fact, he specifically asked me to say that please do not share his business school grades. Everything else is perfect with him. In fact, he's the chairman of Business World, in fact, one of the largest selling business magazines in the country. In fact, he started E4M, or Exchange for Media, which has actually ended up becoming one of the finest media platforms in the country as well. In fact, a very inspirational speaker himself. He's talked at the TED, the TEDx, and so many forums. But I felt that he's also a great person who brings out something very exciting in the panels. So I thought like he's a great guy to be here. Thanks a lot, Anurag, for joining us today. Can we have him on the podium? In fact, the other panelists, we have Wilfred. Wilfred, again, as the managing director for Roland Berger. Wilfred was as well the managing director for Mercedes in India before this role. In fact, Wilfred and I are partnering on something very interesting. We have just finalized a book called Riding the Tiger. This is a book on strategy, which is an effort over a 4-year period, which actually culminates after our interaction with close to about 150 CEOs in the country for the Porter Prize process. It's been a stunning effort, a very painstaking effort, but I think the book is going to be something very interesting, which is going to see a worldwide launch this September. In fact, the book is being published by Penguin Random House, so it should be an interesting thing that we see. In fact, Nilima was unfortunately not able to join us today, so she's a little unwell. So I think we missed her, but probably at the next best opportunity we should have her here as well. Raj, as you know, like Raj, can we have you on the podium? Like I've already introduced him. We have Chinmay Chatterjee from ICICI Foundation. Chinmay. Yeah, sorry, Chinmay Sengupta. My mistake. So like, just got it a little wrong. I'm so sorry. So Chinmay is from ICICI. He is the real world hero in terms of what they're trying to do through the foundation. So Chinmay, can we have you upstage? And we have Deepak Arora, who's joining the panel. Deepak, again, is from SR Foundation. I've known him, again, for about 20 years, probably. He's been a friend for a number of years. In fact, he got me to understand clusters at one point in time, and now that's where it is. So Deepak, thanks a lot for joining in, please. So, Anurag.
Can you hear me? Mr. Sengupta. Let's get started.
Anurag,
yes.
You have
Thank
30,
you, Dr.
35
Kapoor,
to 37. Today. 35 to 37 minutes.
35 to 37 minutes. Okay. Hi, how are you? Good. Thank you so much. If you gave us your credit card, it would be Conscious Capitalism. But for now, we'll take your business card.
Please sit.
So I was telling Mr. Sisodia that I bought this book from the book stand. You know, I was at the Bombay airport 3.5 months back, and I bought a copy of this because really the title got me interesting, and the cover was so, you know, appealing, if I may use. And really, it was a pleasure to read it, and you know, I'm glad I'm having a discussion with you. So we have a Wilfred is somebody I've known because of Amit for many, many years, and the two gentlemen I met for the first time today. You know, I'll start with Raj. If I may call you Raj?
Of course.
Allow me the permission. Okay. You know, your talk and your book couldn't have been amplified at a better time. We're at a time where Donald Trump looks good. At least looks good in electoral maths, right? We're at a time when Brexit has happened. Primarily, we're at a time where there is a distrust of big businesses, of capitalism, or the fact that capitalism has failed in some way to really be conscious in your language. Yes. So, really, do you think that the next, and you know, it is leading to right-wing leaders, whether in France, whether in the US, whether in UK, take any part of the world, right-wing leaders who are in some way anti-business, at least in public posturing, rising. So do you see a change in the way companies address capitalism, in the way leaders address capitalism? Countries look at capitalism, do you see a shift happening in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I certainly think we need a shift. And whether that's happening, I think in some places we do see it, but it does depend on who comes into power. For example, the Obama administration, the Labor Secretary, Tom Perez, who has been traveling the country talking about the need for conscious capitalism, the need for an inclusive and stakeholder-oriented economy. I think if we go that route, if we get Hillary Clinton elected, I think there will be a move towards what can the government do to facilitate, to encourage, to catalyze business to start thinking differently. I do think it's essential because unconscious capitalism really gives rise to all these forces, all these energies that you're talking about. Today it's this right-wing phenomenon, this nationalist, protectionist, all of that, which we know doesn't work, right? I mean, we know how deeply harmful that can be. 150 years ago it was the whole leftist pushback, right? When you started to have businesses that were purely driven by profit start to really, really exploit workers. Where Andrew Carnegie went through a 6-day week, 12 hours a day, and cut pay all at the same time, simply because he wanted to have more profit so that he could be richer than John Rockefeller. And that's what motivated all of that. And when the workers reasonably protested, and 9% of American steel workers were dying every year on the job because they were falling down from exhaustion. You can imagine working in a steel mill for that many hours. And when they protested, he hired a private army, the Pinkertons, to come out and shoot at them and kill many of them. And naturally, so that gave rise to militant unionism, which then created the conditions for Marxism, socialism, communism. That whole left-right divide in the world, I think, was heavily fed by the unconscious practice, the profit-only mindset that existed in the 19th century and has continued to a degree. So I think unless we change that, unless we change the way we talk about, think about, practice business, we will continue to feed these kinds of forces. And the great danger there is that we will start to throw out the baby with the bathwater. This is the best system we know to create prosperity and flourishing. But if we use it, it's like a scalpel can be used by a surgeon to save lives and can be used by a murderer to kill people. We're using this powerful tool of capitalism to inflict harm to too many people in too many ways. And unless we change that consciousness, we run the risk of people rejecting this whole system outright. Only 13% of French people now believe in capitalism and a market economy, from some data I've seen. In the US, young people, the whole Bernie Sanders phenomenon, much higher percentage believe in socialism as an ideal than free markets and free people. Again, they haven't lived through what real socialism feels like. But there is that danger, and when we start to do that, we start to lose economic freedom, we start to lose vitality in the marketplace. There's sort of there's always this debate between dynamism and decency, and we say, well, this system gives us great amount of dynamism, but people have assumed that it can't give us decency. And socialist system supposedly gives you decency, but no dynamism, no innovation. It doesn't even really give you decency if you think about the lives of people in those systems. We have to figure out how to combine those two things, and I think this way of thinking about business, the kinds of businesses that are being embodied here, very readily do combine those. Those are not contradictions. In fact, they reinforce each other. But we do have to change that whole and the way we think about business.
Thank you, Raj. We'll come back to you. Whether it's the shared value concept or the triple bottom line or the conscious capitalism that you talk of, I think there is a shift happening everywhere in the world towards a more inclusive life, if I may use, for everyone, because big businesses have existed to serve the interests of a very few groups or individuals, and I think that is changing. Wilfred, when Raj was talking, I couldn't stop thinking about a phenomena that most CEOs these days have on their mind. It's mindfulness, which is in some way akin to being conscious, being mindful. Today, if you talk to the CEO of a large company in the US, you talk to somebody in India, I think the single biggest thing they want to do is being mindful in the era of technology where, we spend so much time on our phones and we're distracted by what's happening in our immediate, lives and beyond that. Do you think extending the principles that Raj talked of, because they're primarily individual values, the terminology used, the adjectives that Raj uses in his book to describe the companies that promote conscious capitalism, they're very akin to an individual being mindful and having the qualities that a, let's say, caring father or a caring head of a family would have, or a caring mother would have. Very nurturing, very balance-oriented, very, mindful of the surroundings and going beyond the immediate benefit that happens to the household or the individual. So do you see this message of mindfulness leading to conscious capitalism?
I think it's important to be mindful as a leader as far as your organization is concerned. An aligned organization will definitely perform much, much better. And people are aligned if they understand that basically, A, you are behind them, you have their interests at heart. So the answer is yes, but I want to go back to a couple of points that Raj was mentioning earlier. One is he talked about polarization and said, okay, polarization is coming down. Yes and no. Polarization is coming down in the sense that we've taken hundreds of millions out of extreme poverty in India and China and other emerging markets. If you look at the situation of American workers, it's been honestly wasted 40 years, roughly. Since, I think, 1975, there's been no improvement in their living condition.
Where?
In the United States. Similar facts apply to many workers in Europe, and I think that is combined with the fact that today 80 billionaires, according to some of the reports that I've read, own 50% of the world's wealth. That then leads to a question not only about capitalism, it also leads to a question about democracy. Right? If we look at currently the situation in the United States, our friend Hillary Clinton has 43 million in campaign funding. Trump has 1.3, but he has a billionaire friend who's willing at a moment's notice to spend 100 million US dollars in a super PAC. Right? So we have a situation where very powerful, very rich people actually are driving their agenda rather than the agenda of the people. And that, I think, is behind the phenomenon of Bernie Sanders, it's behind the phenomenon of Donald Trump, it's behind Nigel Farage. And typically what is happening is you blame easy targets, and in this case it's mostly the foreigners. And you blame globalization because at the end of the day, globalization has been good for India, it's been good for China, it hasn't been as good for workers in developed economies. So I think that is a combined issue that needs to be addressed. And this, I think what we have to be aware is that 70 years of happy time is nothing on a normal time scale, right? The second thing is also 70 years of happy time does not mean that we can simply extrapolate the successes that we've had as a species going forward, right? In human history, we've always seen that there's been disruption, there's been completely reversal of fortune. India is an example, at one time being the largest nation on earth in terms of economic prowess, and then basically falling down due to colonialization and other factors. So we really, and I think that's where Raj's work is important, the work of Vision Spring is important. We need to create a very strong narrative that there is a different way to run society, and I think that's my view.
If I could just react to one aspect, I agree entirely with you. And conscious businesses, Whole Foods is just an example. So they have a ratio of 19:1 highest pay to median pay, right? The typical American public company is close to 400:1. Walmart might be 1200:1, the ratio. So, they're internally creating the conditions where they don't have that kind of extreme gap. Stock options, typical public company in the US, 75% of stock options are given to 5 people, CEO, CFO, and a few others. And that creates huge incentives for short-term action in order to get the stock price above a certain threshold. Company like Whole Foods, 93% are given to ordinary rank-and-file employees, and 7% go to the top 25 people. Right? So it's much more broadly distributed. They believe a lot in internal equity and so forth. And I think, again, conscious businesses generally tend to do that. They tend to pay people at the front lines better than average. People at the top are paid modestly, and hence you reduce the statistics you were talking about, where you're right, ordinary people haven't seen a rise in real incomes in decades.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I just barge in here and then I'll shut up. But we had these systems in Japan. We had them in Europe. In Germany, it was called the social market economy, where we basically try to balance the need of the people with a free market economy. And I think what has happened is the bull run of the early 2000s, the globalization expansion, and the fact that people could get insanely rich. I remember Goldman Sachs CEO at one point got a compensation that was around $1 billion for 1 year, right? Which is money, right? I wouldn't complain. I wouldn't refuse it either, let me be very clear. But the problem is simply that we've allowed the system to be completely skewed towards a few individuals, despite the fact that success is actually being driven by an organization.
See, you know, Wilfred, since we're talking about expanding the idea of conscious capitalism, and we're primarily talking of American examples, you know, because that's where he's based his book. But really, you've been working in India. Earlier, you were heading a large German MNC. Now you've been working with Indian companies in some way, building better practices, making them more competitive. Do you really see Indian companies embodying this? Or it is just good to speak at conferences and, you know, in some way get paid PR or, you know, get publicity, but are they really making it part of their DNA?
I think there are two representatives of Indian companies that can definitely give an even better answer than myself, but I do believe that in India, for companies, for employees, for all of us, I think the need of the hour is very clear. When we go out in the streets, we see what needs to be done, and that has led to a significant willingness to contribute, right? I mean, we talk about inclusive growth because at the end of the day, we know if we don't get that done, all hell will break loose. If we don't generate 1 million jobs a month, our lives won't be comfortable, they won't be safe. Brazil is a good example. Brazil, some 30 years back, was a very safe country, was a Catholic country, and I can tell you the 10 Commandments don't say go kill and steal, right? Right? So it had a very strong background in terms of religion and moral guidelines, and still went into chaos. And I think India knows that in order to prevent this, we really have to work hard to create opportunity for everybody, as Jason was mentioning.
Thank you, Wilfred. Mr. Sen Gupta, you know, again...
Chinmay is better.
Okay, I'll call you Chinmay if you allow me. Chinmay, you know, you heard Raj, you heard Wilfred, and they sound very optimistic. You come from a very large financial services company, which has the money and the size, scale to be able to make an impact within its employees and within its ecosystem of people. It lends to influences. What is the shift you've seen in the last 3 to 5 years? Of course, ICICI has been in some way ahead of the pack in some of the things that are being discussed. But overall, what is the shift that you see? You really see a shift, or the companies that continue to do conscious capitalism in their own way, they may not have called it. They are the only ones doing, and you know, and the other ones haven't really caught up.
Thanks, Anurag. So it's good for me to answer this question specifically because I come from outside ICICI, in the sense that I started my career with ICICI Foundation 6 years back, and before that I was a telecom entrepreneur, the area Raj was talking about. Having come here, I have seen the growth actually as a third person who was not within the system, and who is viewing it actually from an outside view, so to say.
Right.
Two things I would like to say. One, first statement in general. I think there is a very clear-cut conscious shift from the erstwhile companies who were only into the profit maximization to a kind of inclusive business, so to say. I will not say growth alone, but the business part of it. The second part, the shift has been very gradual.
Right.
Undoubtedly. It has been very, very gradual. And, you know, since I told that I was also an entrepreneur and I came from there in this area because my passion, my life rests at it. My own background was something like that. I was born and brought up in a very remote corner of West Singhbhum in Jharkhand state, okay, and I have gone through my own education system through those schools, government schools, where, you know, one rains and the holiday will be declared because the school doesn't have a roof properly. all that kind of thing, and I wanted to come back here. That's how I ended up at the age of 50. I came back to this area. So I've seen the shift has been there, but it has been very, very slow, very, very slow. And today, if you are talking about this conscious capitalism, one thing is also, it's not about profit maximization alone. If that was the reason, still I could have held it. It is something to do with the power dynamics, actually. Something with the desire to control.
Correct. Thank you for being.
And that I think we need to accept first, because see, another one fact also I would like to say, I'm a long distance runner, ultra marathoner. So we are taught one thing and we learn one thing actually while running long distances, that accept that you will have pain. Okay, if you don't accept it, you can't run long distances. Okay.
No wonder I don't do that.
Okay.
I do other challenging sports.
So once we
I got married.
So once we understand that this is the issue, then you will know that why it is not inclusive. Because something to do with the human psychology, that you need to control things. Right. And you want status quo, because otherwise the things will get disrupted. And the shift what takes place is very gradual therefore. Having said that, having said that, I think it's a very, very welcome move, because there is a consciousness about it, there is an awareness. And people, even for namesake, for instance, as you were telling, that some people believe that, okay, it should be done, but at least they are taking step towards it. And I think that will add on somewhere. Very quickly coming back to ICICI Foundation last 6 years, I think we have grown from just a grant making kind of organization to an organization which is really directly impacting. So today, through our skill development program, which is the largest within our CSR scheme of things, we impact, this year we are doing 51,000 people's training in the skills which are relevant to their ecosystem and where they get employed 100%. So that kind of targets we have taken. We similarly work in the areas of education and health, where the very large, so all the programs are project based basically, looking at how the sustainability will be there and how the system, which is run by the government actually most of the time, can become powerful enough to deliver what they are supposed to deliver. That has been our job.
Fantastic. I'll come back to you, because skill development in India, in my view, is a big scam waiting to be uncovered, because really rather than it being a job creator, it has become a value creator for the entrepreneur who are colluding with the certifying agency to make sure that both make money. And I'm sure at some stage you'll read about it. Deepak, coming to you, you heard Raj, you heard Wilfred, you heard Chinmay say that there is no other choice. If we really want to be relevant as organizations and make difference to the communities we serve, we have to embrace conscious capitalism, create shared value, embrace the triple bottom line, whatever, whichever way you want to look at it. SR is a very, very large organization. And one of the things is that you're in multiple businesses, so you're not in just one business. How do you make sure that the businesses that are financially not doing well, in every conglomerate there will be businesses that will do well, how do you make sure in businesses that are not doing financially well, you follow conscious capitalism? In the businesses that are doing well, it is relatively easier to be able to embrace these things. And I'm talking of Indian context. So how do you really kind of balance that?
Good, thank you. So first let me just pick on a couple of points which Raj and Wilfred and Chinmay made. See, capitalism by its very character, if you really see, has some conscious element to it, and that was very clearly stated in your slide number 2, where there was a clear correlation between the welfare of human beings and the increase in capitalist and the income levels. So that correlation is very clear. And again, I take an example. While every country, every government says that socialistic outlook or socialism is the primary objective, but when Greece went into a crisis, the first thing actually to go over the welfare schemes. So these are kind of contradictory things. So the way, in fact, I look at it is that the capitalism is more about creation, and the socialism is more about how do you really distribute
sharing
the wealth that is being created. And I think, as rightly pointed out, when this wealth creation goes into the paradigm of creating a valuation, that's where between the gap really between creation of wealth and a vacuum that increases, and that's where the problem really starts. Having said that, coming back to your question, See, that's true. Businesses go through cycles. In fact, even countries go through cycles, and that is something that we are seeing. And 3 days back, I was watching a TV show on NDTV, which was by Ruchir Sharma, who's written a book called The Rise and Fall of Nations. And he really takes you through that.
He should be writing a book called The Fall of Morgan Stanley. Look at what he's done to Morgan Stanley in Asia. It's good to be on TV channels and talk.
Yeah.
So the talk is a little tough.
That's true.
So that's a positive statement from the media, or how is it?
It's not media is only sharing what's happening, Dr. Kapoor. But I mean, I don't run Morgan Stanley. Right?
Yeah, but the fact of life is that countries also go through cycles. But coming back to the point which you made, I think there are very clear dimensions, especially for companies which are into the core sector. The fact is true that when you create enterprise, and most of the enterprises exist in rural areas. So the moment you step into an area, there is an automatic pressure which is there, because you are comparatively wealthier, you have much better bandwidth, much better resources.
Sure.
And the communities, so I take an example when, let's say you are building a power plant. So the power plant is built, it's completely lit. And just 2 kilometers away, there are villages which do not have any electricity. So in that sense, there is a social pressure which continues to build. So for core sector companies, I don't think there is a question of choice of not doing anything. There you have to engage. More or less is a question of magnitude. It is a function of how much profits you make sometimes. But the minimalistic part is something at no stage of your business, whether you are making money or you are not making money, you can do away with. There is no way that you can say, I will stop the school because I don't have money. It is not going to happen, because then it is going to lead to far more and graver consequences than anything else. So the paradigm of core sector companies is very different, be it what sector, whatever sector.
Thank you being again so honest and candid about it. Again, you know, when you started your talk, I came midway. When I came, I heard you talking about the purpose of business. And again, I read this on Facebook that, you know, somebody asked someone that what is the purpose of life? And somebody responded that the purpose of life is a life of purpose. Now, today, because of the way me and Dr. Kapoor had a professor called Dr. Preetham Singh, he is still very hail-hearty. Yeah, and he would always tell us that the system of performance incentives should be done away with everywhere in the world. There should be no performance incentives. So, because anyway you are distributing wealth at the top, you are telling people that only reason to do well is that money, and you're also telling them that they need to get more to be able to do well. So for what everybody else is getting and they are getting, they don't need to do an extraordinary job. So he would say that. Do you think time has come where, especially in the financial services sector, which is blamed for all else, because really they are the ones who create models, formulas, structures, they are the ones who corrupt large corporates, individuals, because at the end of the day, it is like a landlord giving out his, real estate to someone on rent, but giving it at such a rent that beyond a point the business won't sustain in a simplistic. So do you think the time has come to really reform the financial services sector? If you had to pick one sector that you'd like to reform using your framework of conscious capitalism, what would that be?
Yeah, I do believe the financial sector, not so much here. I don't think we engaged in that Wild West kind of crazy stuff.
We have
the 2008-2009, right? In that financial crisis, it was all mostly in the West. Extreme risk-taking, the extreme leverage and all of that. So I do think that needs to be reformed. I don't think enough has happened there. What fundamentally seems to have occurred is that the financial sector has become disconnected from the real economy. And the purpose of finance really is to serve as kind of a fuel and to enable other businesses to then create jobs and value and so forth. And if you do that well, then you flourish, right? You're providing that funding. So the higher purpose of finance is to enable other things. And venture capital has its purpose and equity capital has its purpose and debt and so forth. But when banks and the others started trading on their own accounts and started creating these complex instruments, when it's just about making money without really creating value in society, when you're simply trading on information arbitrage and people's lack of understanding, when you're just passing the buck around, I think that's where we lost sight. And I think also going back to the masculine, feminine, Wall Street is an extremely masculine, testosterone-driven culture. Somebody said if Lehman Brothers were Lehman Sisters, we would not have had the financial crisis of the 2008.
You're being very chauvinistic. I
don't know.
I protest that.
I think it's really true though. So that sector definitely needs to be reformed. I think every industry, every sector exists for a reason. It adds value in the world. But over time, when it loses sight of its fundamental purpose and becomes just about profit maximization, then you start the slippery slope downhill. The pharmaceutical industry to me is another one. Not here perhaps, but in the US certainly. It used to be one of the most admired industries. Why? Because you're in the business of saving lives.
Absolutely.
And, and there were extraordinary things that were done by many of these companies. But in the last few decades, this industry has become the most profit-driven. So Johnson & Johnson, which was one of the most admired companies, and we included them in terms of endearment, in recent years has really lost their way. They just paid a $4 billion fine, 4 billion with a B, for unethical marketing of one drug, and they have like dozens of these kinds of scandals. Every major company, Merck, you talked about river blindness, Merck was a highly admired company, and that was one of the things they did, they gave away that drug, but they too have lost sight in many cases with their Vioxx and other things. There's just so much money there, and the pricing is out of whack. People are charging $50,000, $100,000, $500,000 a year for one pill. So it's become so profit-driven. And the unethical marketing, I started a book a few years ago called Drugs Are Us, which was about the unethical marketing of pharmaceuticals, and then it turned out somebody else was writing a similar book, so I didn't do it, but I think it's rampant because the money is so much, and many people are protected because of insurance. They don't actually see the price of what it's actually costing. And at the same time, they are now marketing those drugs which are approved for one person, one particular condition, and then they market them for many other conditions and just try to expand the market. So to me, those two industries come to mind. I think the food sector as well, which is focused on empty calories and lack of nutrition and so forth.
Good, Raj. In fact, I was reading this cover story in Bloomberg Business Week where Nestle is trying to reinvent itself from a company that makes you unhealthy to a company that makes you healthy.
Right.
And really, that's food is a big area. Wilfred, with all this happening, and I'll bring this question to Chinmay and to you, sir, is there a lack of leadership? If Trump is moving forward, if the Brexit voices are winning, if you generally see what's happening, you talked about Brazil, is there a lack of leadership that is hindering the implementation of conscious capitalism?
No, I think it's not only a lack of leadership in, again, capitalism, we need close collaboration between all aspects of society, and that needs leadership by politicians, right? I can't expect somebody who has an opportunity to make $1 billion to go and say, okay, now cut my salary to a reasonable number which is closer to, I don't know, 15 million. It's not going to happen. It may happen in one case, but it's not going to happen across the board. So I will need to look at a closer collaboration between politicians and basically companies. And coming back to the financial services, financial sector, the financial sector paid the politicians. Hillary Clinton is on their payroll at the end of the day, as far as I understand. Have we seen, and even Obama, right? So have we seen the kind of corrections that we need? No. Which goes back to the
so where will we import leaders from? Mars, Venus?
Well,
Because
I mean,
if we want the kind of leaders that you're talking who don't take donations, then we really have to...
Not donations, the question of how you finance political parties, and there are different ways of doing that, right? The different models. As far as Brexit is concerned, take Angela Merkel. If we have an accident tomorrow and she's not there anymore, who are you going to go to in the EU? There is nobody currently who's leading the EU that would have enough standing, enough clout to really affect positive change in a time that for the EU has been dismal.
We have to, Pat, so I'll come to Chinmay and then I'll come to Deepak. Chinmay, the corporate CEO or the promoter the new mafia? I know I'm asking a very direct question because there has been this crony capitalism that has existed for the last 30, 40 years in India. And would it be fair to say that the new mafia is this entrepreneur that benefited from crony capitalism? I want an honest answer. A responsible though, but honest.
Sure. See, I'll take a cue from what Wilfred was talking. Question is...
Wilfred, I didn't ask you about the Volkswagen thing.
No, it's
I
another
you're my
example,
friend.
right? So I mean, I don't think this is limited to one particular country. I think you see it across the board.
And actually, I'm also trying to answer it as in a general tone of my understanding of the market and what I understand. Now, see this politics and business. You know, somewhere I read, and that was a beautiful thing, that the politics of business is more dangerous than the business of politics. Okay, so that's very interesting actually. Actually, the way. So again, coming to that question, that what you want to get out of the business, and that's very important. You were talking about skill development just now with a very clear cut and very pointed issue that of what happens there.
Because certification is...
So because that's a business again, and that business is for controlling that segment of work where loads of money is spending, right? And if you discuss that issue also, you are very well aware that NSDC has not been able to spend that money, which is lying with them as a corpus, right? To the extent of, say, I do not know, 2,500 crores or something 2 years back. They were not able to spend. And so what I'm trying to say, until unless the purpose is clear and how do you want to go about it is clear, and it is left to individuals, and those individuals do not want to grow the leadership platter, so to say. Just now he talked about Markel, I'm talking about anyone else for that matter. You will not be able to see the second line, forget about the third, fourth line as a potential developers, then there will be an issue.
So you're saying leaders creating more leaders is not happening, and that is not leading to it.
It's certainly not.
Yeah. Coming to you, Deepak, the subtitle of the book is Liberating the Heroic Spirit of Business. Now, he again talked of organization as an individual, conscious, mindful, you know, all those acronyms that he used in his presentation. What do you think today's CEO needs to change to be able to implement the heroic spirit of business?
Sure. So I'd like to make 2 points, and I think the first point which you asked Chinmay was, my take on that would be, see, there is a new paradigm which is there, and we are all aware of the consequences and perils of the new paradigm that we see in the country. But having said that, is that paradigm new to the world, or is it new to India? So in that context, if you see, I think the example which you took, that there are companies in the US even in the past which virtually force the workers to work longer hours, put in tough conditions, and as a consequence you actually saw a very jingoistic unions coming into existence. And so the basic ideology in that was also wealth creation, and it may be agglomeration, may not be much of a distribution. So when certain countries grew little higher, probably the good and the bad lessons were equally learned by the countries which were little more laggard in economic growth, GDP, income levels. So we picked up both the good and the bad. And this is a continuously evolving cycle in the world. And if you look at the world history, things have been moving in that sense ever since. And that is the reason why different nations at different stages perform differently. India had 24% of global trade way back in the 1700s. Today you are less than 2%. So who knows that 20 years from now you may again go back to, if not 24%, maybe 5%, 10%.
You think Achhe Din will come in 20 years?
Maybe even more. At least that volume of global trade we may see only then.
Amit doesn't want the Prime Minister to know that.
Okay. So he's a close friend, so he doesn't want to know. But to answer your question directly, I think the leaders today, yes, need to be conscious of this fact very well, that nothing is constant but change. And if you do not continuously evolve your own paradigm, if you do not continue to press that refresh button under the changing circumstances, We will look at different contexts, different challenges, and different situations and different discussions.
And be sensitive to the changes around
Yes.
in,
Yes.
that are happening in the environment and hence the aspirations of people. So it's been a good panel discussion. And Amit, would you want? Yeah.
Could I add one thought on that last question? I think ultimately it does really get down to having the right leaders in place in the world of politics and in business. Unfortunately, we have a system right now where power and virtue don't go together, and they need to. Right? The more power somebody has, the more we need to ensure that they are virtuous and conscious. So the level of consciousness of the leader really sets the bar on the level of consciousness of the whole organization. So having the right people with the right level of consciousness get the power, right, which can then affect extraordinary positive change. And the kind of way in which they use power is very different than a traditional leader who is there basically operating from a much narrower perspective. It's really power with and not power over. Right? They are tapping into, and that's what we talk about in Shakti leadership, they're tapping into deeper sources of power when you are aligned with the forces of evolution, when you're aligned with the trajectory of human progress. You become an agent now of that which needs to emerge. As a leader, you're channeling that kind of power, and that's infinite power. And for me to be powerful as that kind of leader, I don't have to take away power from anybody else. Whereas an ego-based power is really that for that leader to be powerful, everybody else becomes powerless. So how do we create the conditions in any organization where the right people get identified? Unfortunately, our traditional systems, like there was a study in Australia that showed people rising most rapidly in those organizations, they had personality profiles that corresponded with that of a psychopath. The more psychopathic you were, the more you would rise.
Thank God I don't live in Australia.
No, but that's just an example, right? Many companies have that. People who deliver the numbers, who get the results, it doesn't matter at what cost, right? It's winning at all costs, getting the numbers, etc. They tend to get promoted, but what are the human consequences of that?
Yeah, so as a leader, what are you rewarding your team members for, and what are you reprimanding them for?
And how are you selecting to begin with?
So of course that's a larger discussion, but we'll end this. I was thinking that when we think of conscious capitalism and we think of leadership, we think of all the virtues that you talked of. If we were to talk of Indian spiritual gurus, the Babas, I don't know, they are a bad example of conscious capitalism. They're conscious in a different way and they're capitalist in a different way. I'm sure Baba Ramdev is coming to your mind. But I don't think they can be a poster boy for your book. Amit, any questions you would want or you want to?
I think we'll just close here. Anurag, thanks.
Thank you for being a great panel, and please give them a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Anurag. Thanks. You were absolutely stunning with those pointed questions. Thanks a lot. On the Babas thing, I think it's about the ticket to heaven market. It's a very different debate, but I would love to have it at one of the marketing summits. But I would, in fact, Anurag invoked one of our gurus. His name is Dr. Singh. He used to say something very interesting, that a man is known by the contribution he makes. So at the end of the day, it's about contribution that we make, and that's where conscious capitalism probably comes in. Thanks a lot.